What would you do if both engines quit at 39,000 feet with 4 hours of ocean in every direction? It's a routine transatlantic red-eye. 300 people, most of them asleep, wrapped in thin airline blankets. A few flickering screens still glow in the dark cabin. Flight attendants move quietly down the aisle, collecting the last dinner trays. Outside the windows, there's nothing. No lights, no land. Just black ocean 6 miles down. This is the safest moment in modern travel. A wide-body jet, hundreds of sensors, a computer double-checking every decision the pilots make. Nothing here should be able to go wrong. Then the engines stop. Not sputter, not cough. Stop. Both of them, within minutes of each other, in the middle of the Atlantic, 4 hours from the nearest runway in any direction. 293 passengers are about to find out what a $30 billion aircraft can do without a single working engine. Some of what happens next has never been repeated in aviation history, before or since. This is the story of Air Transat Flight 236, August 24, 2001. Toronto's Pearson Airport, evening shift, nothing unusual on the ramp. An Airbus A330 sits at the gate, barely a few years old. One of the most heavily computerized passenger jets ever built. Days earlier, it had gone through a scheduled engine swap. Routine maintenance, the kind that happens on hundreds of aircraft every week without incident. At the controls, Captain Robert Pichet, over 16,000 flight hours, and First Officer Dirk de Jager, closing in on 5,000. Between them, decades of experience, the kind of crew airlines put on the long, quiet overnight legs precisely because nothing is supposed to happen. At 20:52 local time, the aircraft lifts off the runway, climbs out over Lake Ontario, and turns east. Destination, Lisbon. 293 passengers, 13 crew. Dinner service. Dimmed cabin lights. The kind of flight where the biggest complaint the next morning is a stiff neck. Somewhere behind the right engine cowling, though, something is already wrong. A fuel line, installed during that recent maintenance, is sitting a few millimeters closer to a rigid hydraulic tube than it was ever designed to. Nobody on the aircraft knows it. Nobody on the ground caught it. And at cruising altitude, with the engine vibrating exactly as it's supposed to, that tiny gap is about to become the whole story. Some viewers will have heard that strange mechanical failures over open ocean are linked to dead zones or magnetic anomalies. That's internet folklore, not aviation science. Every failure in this story has a mundane, traceable, mechanical cause, which, honestly, is scarier than a mystery would be. At 5:16 Greenwich Mean Time, a quiet alert appears on the central display. The right engine's oil pressure is climbing, its temperature is dropping. To two experienced pilots, that's backwards. Oil pressure and temperature are supposed to move together. Pichet and de Jager run through the electronic manual. Nothing matches. They radio maintenance control in Montreal. Even the engineers on the ground can't explain it. The working theory? A faulty sensor. Nothing on the aircraft suggests otherwise. The engine sounds normal, the flight is smooth, the cabin has no idea anything is being discussed in the cockpit. Roughly 20 minutes later, a second more troubling number appears. A fuel imbalance. The right tank is measurably lower than the left, more than a normal difference, and closing the gap faster than either engine could be burning it. The crew checks the flight plan fuel calculations against the live readouts. The totals don't add up. Something is disappearing. They ask a flight attendant to look out at the wing. In the dark, over open ocean, there's nothing to see. No visible leak, no vapor trail, no fire. Just a wing that looks exactly like it should, attached to an aircraft quietly losing fuel it has no way to explain. This is the moment that decides everything. Standard procedure for a fuel imbalance calls for opening the crossfeed valve, connecting both fuel systems so they equalize. It's a routine action, drilled into every A330 pilot. The assumption baked into that procedure is simple. Both tanks are intact, and the imbalance is just uneven consumption. At 5:45, Pichet opens the valve. If the right side truly had a hidden leak, this decision does one thing. It lets the good fuel from the left tank flow straight into the failing system, and straight out through the breach. The aircraft isn't just losing fuel anymore, It's now actively pumping its remaining reserves toward the hole. The crew turns toward the only usable strip of concrete for hundreds of miles in any direction, a military base in the Azores called Lajes. And the clock, which nobody in the cockpit can see, has already started running out. Would either engine even make it that far? At 6:13 Greenwich Mean Time, the right engine, still pulling its share of the aircraft's weight through the night sky, chokes and flames out. The system shuts it down automatically to prevent it from tearing itself apart. Pichet declares an emergency. The aircraft is now flying on one engine, legal, survivable, well within the aircraft's design limits. Except, the cross-feed valve is still open. At 6:23 GMT, 10 minutes later, the left engine starts to surge. The same fuel that should be keeping it alive is still being pulled toward the same breach on the right side. There is no more good fuel left to give it. At 6:26 GMT, the left engine goes silent. For 8 hours, the two turbines had been the constant background hum of the flight, the sound nobody notices until it's gone. Now, there's nothing. Just wind moving over the fuselage. The main generators, powered by the engines, die with them. The cabin goes dark, except for dim emergency floor lighting. A 233-ton aircraft, 6 miles above open ocean, is now flying on physics alone. There's a persistent idea that a plane with no engines just drops like a stone. It doesn't. A wide-body jet is an extremely efficient glider. For every kilometer of altitude, this aircraft could cover roughly 12 kilometers forward. The real danger isn't falling out of the sky. It's landing it, in the dark, with no second attempt. A small propeller-driven turbine, the ram air turbine, deploys automatically beneath the fuselage, spun by the airflow itself. It generates just enough power to keep the flight controls and the most critical instruments alive. Pichet and de Jager are now flying an airliner using little more than the electrical equivalent of a bicycle generator. 120 kilometers to Lajes. No engines, no second chance if the approach is wrong. In the cabin, flight attendants move through the dark, calmly instructing passengers to put on life vests and brace, all while listening to the wind outside, the only sound confirming the aircraft is still flying at all. There's another problem, one most passengers would never think of. The aircraft is coming in too high and too fast, with none of the usual tools, engine thrust reduction, reverse thrust, available to slow it down. Pichet begins a series of sharp turns, banking hard left and right, deliberately bleeding off excess speed and altitude, in a maneuver that leaves almost no margin for error. The runway comes into view. There will not be a second approach. At 6:45 Greenwich Mean Time, the wheels hit the runway at Lajes so hard, the aircraft actually bounces once before settling. Coming in nearly 100 kilometers per hour faster than a normal landing speed, the tires shred instantly, throwing sparks off the wheel rims onto the tarmac. Pichet and de Jager stand on the brakes, fully aware the runway ends in a cliff. The aircraft rolls for more than 2 kilometers before it finally stops. All 293 passengers and 13 crew walk away. 10 people are treated for minor injuries. Nobody dies. It remains, to this day, one of the longest unpowered glides by a commercial airliner in aviation history. Investigators found the cause fast, and it wasn't sabotage, and it wasn't a design flaw in the aircraft itself. During that routine engine swap days earlier, mechanics had transferred hydraulic components from the old engine onto the replacement, a common accepted practice since the parts looked interchangeable. They weren't, quite. On the newer engine model, a fuel line ran just a few millimeters closer to a rigid hydraulic hose than it did on the older version, close enough that normal engine vibration let the two lines make contact. Over hours of flight, that contact slowly sawed through the fuel line, a slow-motion accident that had been building since before the aircraft even left the gate. The result? Roughly 17 tons of fuel lost in under 90 minutes, and a crossfeed decision, made by the book, based on the information available at the time, that turned a bad leak into a total loss of power. Captain Robert Pichet was credited as a hero for the landing itself, while the airline was fined over the maintenance failure. Regulators worldwide tightened the rules. Engine components from different production versions can no longer be mixed without explicit manufacturer sign-off. The aircraft was repaired and flew for years afterward, a 200-ton reminder that, in aviation, There is no such thing as an insignificant detail. A few millimeters of clearance, missed once, on the ground, nearly ended 293 lives over open water. So here's the question worth sitting with. Was this an unpredictable chain of bad luck? Or was it always going to happen, the moment two mismatched parts were bolted together in a hangar in Toronto?